My name is Walter, and just last week, my grandson stole the last bit of emergency money I had in this world. $5,000, tucked away in a sock in my dresser drawer. But the theft wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I told my son Michael, and he looked at me not with concern but with pity, as if I were a piece of old furniture that had started to crack. He said I was just old and confused. My own son erased my truth with a single sentence. I've built hundreds of homes with these hands. Solid homes that still stand today, but in that moment I felt like the foundation of my own life had turned to sand. What would you do in my place? I want you to listen to my story until the end and tell me, what would you have done? And let me know from which city you're listening. I need to know I'm not alone in this. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. It all happened on a Tuesday morning, a gray Chicago day that matched the feeling in my gut. I'd gone to my drawer to check on the money, just something I did every few weeks. It was my safety net, scraped together from years of meager Social Security checks. It was for a real emergency, the kind you don't want to be a burden for. But when my hand went into the old wool sock where I kept the bills, it came out empty. I felt a cold jolt, a physical shock that ran up my arm. I pulled the drawer all the way out, dumping its contents onto the small, worn rug in my room. T-shirts, old photos of my Eleanor, a few medals from my time in the service, but no money. The $5,000, my last piece of independence, was gone. It felt like someone had stolen the air from my lungs. I walked out to the living room, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Michael was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and my grandson, Ryan, was slouched in a chair, a smirk on his face like he already knew what I was going to say. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Michael," I said, "the money from my drawer, it's gone." Ryan didn't even look up from his video game, but his smirk widened just a fraction. Michael sighed, a long, tired sound, like I had just presented him with another chore. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask where it was or what happened. His wife, Linda, who was in the kitchen, stopped what she was doing and just stared at me with cold, impatient eyes. The silence in that room was heavier than any load of bricks I'd ever carried. That's when my son delivered the blow. He finally looked up from his phone, his expression not one of concern, but of weary frustration. "Dad," he said, his voice laced with that condescending tone he'd been using for years. "You're getting old. You probably just misplaced it and forgot. Stop accusing people. Stop accusing people." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was talking about his own son, Ryan, who I knew had been in my room the day before, looking for a charger. As Michael spoke, I heard Linda mutter from the kitchen, just loud enough for me to hear, "Always making trouble." It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my mind, my dignity. They had decided I was no longer a person to be believed, but a problem to be managed. I didn't argue. What was the point? Arguing would only prove their point that I was a confused, difficult old man. I just stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of their judgment, the finality of their dismissal. Then I turned around without another word and walked back to my little room. Each step felt heavy, like I was wading through mud. I closed the door behind me, and the click of the latch sounded like a prison cell locking. A profound, bone-deep chill settled over me. It was the chilling realization that the promise I made to Eleanor on her deathbed, to take care of our boy, had been a one-way street. In their eyes, I wasn't family anymore. I was just a burden, a ghost haunting the hallways of a house I helped buy, waiting to finally disappear. Sitting here, in the silence of this small room, the walls feel like they're closing in. The quiet is louder than any argument could ever be. It's in this quiet that the past comes flooding back, not like a gentle stream, but like a dam breaking. I wasn't always this old, forgotten man in the corner of my son's house. My story started a long way from Chicago, in a small town in Ohio, on a farm where the dirt got under your fingernails and never quite left. We didn't have much, but we had our name and our word. My father used to say, "Walter, a man is only as good as his promises." I carried that with me when I left for the big city at 18, with nothing but a few dollars and a belief that hard work could build a life. Chicago was a monster of steel and noise, a world away from the open fields I knew. It could swallow a young man whole if he wasn't careful. I found work as a bricklayer, my hands learning the rough language of mortar and stone. It was brutal work, hot in the summer, bone-chilling in the winter. But every brick I laid was a step forward. I was building something, not just for others, but for myself. I took pride in it. I'd walk past a building years later and think, I helped put that wall up. It's still standing. It felt honest. It was a life built with sweat, a foundation I thought was solid, one that couldn't be washed away by a few heartless words. It was in Chicago that I met Eleanor. She worked at a diner near a site I was on. She had a smile that could cut through the thickest city fog, and a laugh that made you forget how tired you were. I was just a young guy covered in dust, but she saw something else in me. Our first date was a walk by the lake. I was so nervous I could barely speak, but she just listened. She didn't care that my hands were calloused or that I didn't have fancy words. She saw the man I was trying to be. Marrying her was the single best decision of my life. She was my rock, my partner, the one who made a rented apartment feel like a palace. She was home. We started with nothing. A tiny 2-room apartment with a rattling radiator and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it was ours. Eleanor had a way of making everything beautiful. She'd put a single flower in a glass on the table, and it would change the whole room. We saved every penny. We dreamed of a small house, a yard for a dog, a future for the children we hoped to have. Those early years were tough, but they were filled with a kind of hope I haven't felt in a long, long time. We were a team, facing the world together. We believed in each other. That belief was the most valuable thing we owned. Then Michael was born. The moment I held him in my arms, this tiny, helpless thing, my world shifted on its axis. All the hard work, all the sacrifices, suddenly had a face and a name. It wasn't just for me and Eleanor anymore, it was for him. I looked at his little hands and swore I'd give him a life better than mine. I wanted him to have choices I never had, to work with his mind, not just his back. I didn't want him to come home every night with his body aching, covered in grime. He was going to go to college. I made that promise to him, silently, right there in that hospital room. It became the driving force of my life. My job as a foreman was demanding. It meant long hours, responsibility for the crew, and the constant physical strain of construction. I carried the weight of that work home with me every day. My back was a road map of pain, and my hands were permanently rough, no matter how much Eleanor tried to soften them with lotion. But I never complained. That pain was a small price to pay. It was the cost of Michael's future. Every dollar earned was a piece of his education, a brick in the foundation of the life I was building for him. I'd look at my hands and see college textbooks, a safe home, a future free from the kind of labor that grinds a man down. I remember one summer my crew was offered a big weekend job, double pay. It was the same weekend as our annual family picnic with Eleanor's cousins. Michael was about 10 and loved those picnics. Telling him I couldn't go was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I saw the disappointment in his eyes. But as I worked under the hot sun that Saturday, mixing mortar, all I could think about was the college fund. That weekend's pay was a full semester's worth of books. He didn't understand then, and I never explained it. I just let him think I chose work over him. I thought one day he'd understand that everything I did, every sacrifice, was for him. The day we got the acceptance letter from the university, Eleanor and I just held each other and cried. It was a quiet, private celebration. We didn't throw a party. We just sat at our kitchen table, holding the letter, reading it over and over again. All those years of overtime, of worn-out boots and aching muscles, it had all been worth it. Our son, the son of a bricklayer, was going to college. It felt like we had broken a cycle. We had given him a key to a door I never even knew existed when I was his age. It was the proudest moment of my life. I felt like I had fulfilled my purpose as a father. When Michael was a teenager, I saved up for 2 years to buy him his first car. It wasn't much, just a used Ford pickup, a bit rusted around the wheel wells but with a solid engine. He needed it to get to his part-time job. He was thrilled. He spent the whole weekend polishing it. What he never knew was that the money I used to buy that truck was the money I had been putting aside for my own dental work. I needed a couple of crowns, and my teeth ached most days. But seeing the freedom and pride in his eyes as he drove that truck for the first time was worth more than any dental work. I just chewed on the other side of my mouth and never said a word. Watching him walk across that stage at his college graduation, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Eleanor was beside me, squeezing my hand so tight, her face beaming. Our boy, in a cap and gown, holding a diploma. He did it. We did it. He came over to us afterward, and I hugged him, smelling the clean fabric of his gown, so different from the dusty scent of my work clothes. I felt I had delivered on my promise. I had given him the tools to build a different kind of life, a better one. I thought my work was done, that I had secured his future. Then he met Linda. At first, I was happy for him. She was educated, ambitious. I thought she would be a good partner, someone who would support his dreams. I welcomed her into our family with an open heart. Eleanor tried her best too, teaching her family recipes, sharing stories about Michael as a boy. But there was always a distance with Linda, a polite wall you could never quite get past. She looked at me and Eleanor like we were relics from a bygone era, simple folks who didn't quite fit into the new, sophisticated life they were building for themselves. The change in Michael was subtle at first, but it was there. The biggest sacrifice came a few years later. Michael and Linda wanted to buy their first house, but they were short on the down payment. I still owned that small plot of land back in Ohio, the one my father had left me. It was my only real tie to my roots, to my own parents. It was a piece of my history, but Michael was my future. After talking it over with Eleanor, we sold it. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, signing the papers. It felt like I was signing away a part of myself. But when I handed that check to Michael, and he promised he'd pay me back one day, I told him to forget it. A father's job is to give, I said. Just be happy. Then Eleanor got sick. The years that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments, hospital stays, and quiet, fearful nights. I became her full-time caregiver. I learned to cook the soft food she could eat, to manage her medications, to help her move from the bed to the chair. The vibrant woman I married slowly faded, but her spirit never broke. She faced it all with a grace that humbled me. My world shrank to the four walls of our small house, but it didn't matter. My only job was to be there for her, just as she had always been there for me. The construction foreman learned a new kind of work, the quiet, heartbreaking labor of love and loss. On one of her last good days, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were clear. "Walter," she whispered, "promise me, you'll take care of our boy, no matter what." I saw the worry in her eyes. Maybe she saw the changes in Michael more clearly than I did. Maybe she knew I'd be alone. "Of course, my love," I told her, my voice cracking. "He's our son. I'll always take care of him." It was the last promise I ever made to her. A sacred vow. I intended to keep it until my dying day. Her passing left a hole in my soul so vast that I thought I would fall right into it. After she was gone, the house was just a collection of rooms filled with ghosts. It was too empty, too quiet. Moving in with Michael and Linda seemed like the logical thing to do. I didn't want to be a burden. I just couldn't bear the loneliness. I thought we would be a family, 3 generations under one roof. I'd help around the house, tell my grandson stories, be a part of their lives. I sold our little house, the one Eleanor had made a home, and gave Michael most of the money, keeping just a small amount for myself for emergencies. I thought I was investing in my family, in my final years of peace and belonging. And so all of it, the back-breaking labor, the missed picnics, the sold land, the promise to my dying wife, it all led me here, to this room, to this silence, to the chilling realization that the foundation I spent my entire life building for my son was built on sand. The boy I sacrificed everything for now sees me as a confused old man, a nuisance. The promise I made to Eleanor echoes in my ears, but it feels like a mockery. I didn't fail her. I did everything I could to take care of our boy. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that a father is more than just a memory or a bank account. He is a man who deserves dignity. This didn't happen overnight. The poison that seeped into my son's heart was a slow-acting one, administered in small, daily doses by his wife, Linda. When I first moved in, things were polite. There was an effort made. Linda would ask if I needed anything, and Michael would make a point to sit with me for a few minutes after he got home from work. I thought it was a new beginning, a way to mend the hole Eleanor's passing had left in all of us. I told myself that the initial awkwardness was just the family finding its new rhythm. I was so desperate for that to be true that I ignored the early signs, the little things that felt like a pebble in your shoe. Small at first, but a source of constant, growing irritation. The first real crack appeared about a month in. I was in the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea, and I noticed the faucet was dripping. A simple fix, just a worn-out washer. I mentioned it to Michael, telling him I could take care of it in the morning, that I still had my old tools. Linda, who was nearby, gave Michael a look I've since come to know well. It was a look that said, "Handle this." Michael cleared his throat and said, "It's okay, Dad. We'll call a plumber. These new faucets are complicated." It wasn't about the faucet. It was about establishing territory. He was telling me, gently at first, that this was his house, and my old ways, my old skills, were no longer needed or trusted here. I just nodded and said, "All right, son." Soon, our shared dinners at the dining room table became a thing of the past. It started with Linda saying they were too tired to have a formal meal and just wanted to eat on the couch while watching TV. The first time, she brought me a plate in the kitchen. "You can eat here, Walter. It's quieter for you," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. Soon, it became the routine. They would be in the living room, the sound of some sitcom or reality show filling the house, and I would be at the small kitchen table, eating alone. The silence in that kitchen was deafening. I could hear their laughter, their conversations, and it felt like I was listening to a party from outside, with my face pressed against the cold glass. I used to love telling Ryan, my grandson, stories about the old days. Stories about building the city, about what Chicago was like when I was a young man, about his grandmother Eleanor. When he was younger, he'd listen with wide eyes. But as he got older, Linda started to intervene. "Don't bore him with all that old stuff, Walter," she'd say, pulling Ryan away. "He has homework to do." Michael never contradicted her. He just let it happen. He allowed her to build a wall between me and his son, brick by brick. The stories I carried inside me, the history of our family, were deemed irrelevant, a boring monologue from a man who was out of touch with the modern world. My birthday was another milestone of my growing invisibility. The first year I lived with them, the day came and went without a single mention. I sat in my room, waiting, thinking maybe they were planning a surprise. By evening, I realized the only surprise was their complete forgetfulness. Around 9 o'clock, Michael knocked on my door. "Oh, hey, Dad. Linda just reminded me. It's your birthday, right? Sorry, work has been crazy." He handed me a $20 bill. "Go buy yourself something nice." A $20 bill. After a lifetime of sacrifice, my value had been reduced to a crumpled bill, offered as an afterthought. With Eleanor, we never had much, but she'd bake a small cake and we'd celebrate. Her presence was the gift. The final nail in the coffin of my usefulness came one afternoon when Michael was trying to fix a loose railing on the porch. He was struggling with it, using the wrong kind of anchors for the wood. I'd built dozens of porches in my day. I knew exactly what he needed to do. I walked over and tried to offer some advice. "Son," I started, "if you use a lag bolt instead of that screw, it'll hold much better." He stopped, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at me with pure annoyance. "Dad, you don't understand this stuff anymore," he said, his voice sharp. "Times have changed. Materials are different." That sentence cut me deeper than any insult. He wasn't just rejecting my help. He was erasing my entire life's work and expertise. After that, I began to retreat. I learned to make myself smaller, to take up less space, to be less of a presence. I stopped offering advice. I stopped telling stories. I stayed in my room most of the day, reading old paperbacks or just looking out the window. It was safer there. Out in the main house, I was a ghost, a silent observer of a family life I was no longer a part of. I'd hear them making plans for the weekend, talking about going out to dinner or visiting friends, and my name was never included. I wasn't just uninvited. It was as if the possibility of my inclusion never even crossed their minds. I had become a fixture, like an old coat rack in the corner that no one uses anymore. The change in Ryan was perhaps the most painful to watch. He absorbed his parents' attitude like a sponge. The boy who used to ask for stories now walked past my room without a glance. He'd have his friends over, and they'd be loud and boisterous in the living room, but he never once brought one of them to my door to say hello to his grandpa. I became Michael's old man who lives in the back room. I'd hear Linda telling him to keep the noise down because your grandfather is trying to sleep, even in the middle of the afternoon. It wasn't about concern for my rest. It was about defining me as old and frail, someone who needed to be managed and contained. I saw the contempt in my grandson's eyes that day he was in my room, looking for a charger. It was the same dismissive look his father gave me, but cruder, less practiced. He looked around my small, neat space with a kind of disdain, as if it were a museum of forgotten things. He saw my old photos of Eleanor, my service medals, my worn-out books, and he saw nothing of value. To him, I was just an old man with old things. He didn't see a life lived, a city built, a family raised. He only saw an obstacle, a drain on his parents' resources. And in his eyes I saw the final product of years of quiet, insidious lessons from his mother and father. The invitations from my own side of the family, my few remaining cousins back in Ohio, started to get lost. Linda would take the mail in, and I'd later hear from a cousin on the phone, asking why I didn't respond to their invitation for the annual family reunion. "What invitation?" I'd ask. Linda would feign surprise. "Oh, that must have gotten mixed in with the junk mail. I'm so sorry, Walter." It happened twice before I understood. She was actively cutting my ties to my own past, isolating me completely, ensuring that my world consisted of nothing but the four walls of their house, a house where I was a guest who had long overstayed his welcome. Michael, my son, was the great disappointment. He wasn't a cruel man by nature, but he was a weak one. He chose the path of least resistance, and that path was paved by his wife's desires. It was easier for him to disappoint his old father than to have an argument with Linda. It was easier to adopt her view of me as a burden than to stand up for the man who had given him everything. Each time he failed to defend me, each time he sided with her in some small daily injustice, a piece of the respect I had for him withered and died. I was watching the son I raised disappear, replaced by this stranger who looked at me with tired, guilty eyes. I remember one evening I was sitting in the kitchen and I overheard Linda on the phone with one of her friends. She was complaining. "I feel like I'm running a nursing home," she said, followed by a dry, humorless laugh. "He's just always there. We have no privacy." The words were like a physical blow. A nursing home. I wasn't a father or grandfather. I was an inmate. An unpaid, unwelcome resident in an institution of her resentment. I got up quietly, my half-eaten dinner turning to ash in my mouth, and went back to my room. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. That was a turning point. I stopped seeing their actions as thoughtless or forgetful. I saw them for what they were, a deliberate campaign to push me into the margins of their lives. The forgotten birthdays, the solitary meals, the dismissal of my knowledge. It was all part of a strategy to make my presence so minimal, so insignificant, that I would eventually just fade away. They were waiting for me to become what they already believed I was, a relic, a memory, a problem that would one day solve itself. The love I had poured into my son had been returned as a kind of weary tolerance that was just a step away from outright resentment. The financial strain became another weapon. Linda would make comments in front of me about how expensive groceries were or how high the electricity bill was. She never asked me for money directly, not then. It was more subtle. It was a way of reminding me that I was a dependent, a mouth to feed, a light left on in a room. She made me feel guilty for the simple act of existing, for taking up resources. I, who had sold my father's land for them, who had given them the money for my own home, was being made to feel like a freeloader. The humiliation was a constant, low-grade fever that never broke. Ryan's attitude grew worse. He started treating my room as an extension of his own space, walking in without knocking to grab things he'd left there. He saw me not as a person deserving of privacy, but as a non-entity. The day before the money disappeared, he had been in my room for a good 10 minutes, rummaging through my closet, supposedly for an old board game. I now realize what he was truly doing. He was scouting. He was taking inventory. He was looking at my life's last safety net with the cold, calculating eyes of a thief who felt entitled to the spoils. I think about the promise I made to Eleanor. I'll take care of our boy. For years, I thought that meant providing for him, ensuring his success. I never imagined it would mean this, that it would mean enduring humiliation in his home, being erased by his wife, and being robbed by his son. I kept my promise. I gave and I gave until there was almost nothing left. But my son, he didn't just break a promise to me. He broke the sacred, unwritten contract between a child and a parent, the one that says you honor those who gave you life, you respect their dignity, you care for them as they once cared for you. And so, when my son stood there and called me a confused old man, it wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final, logical conclusion to a story that had been written over years of small abandonments. It was the moment the quiet campaign of marginalization became an open declaration of war on my reality. on my sanity. He wasn't just dismissing my accusation about the money, he was dismissing me, my entire being. In his eyes, I had finally completed my transformation from father to burden, from a man to a problem. And in that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, I was utterly and completely alone. My life as a bricklayer taught me one thing: a foundation is everything. If the foundation is weak, it doesn't matter how beautiful the house is, it will eventually crack and fall. I spent my life building what I thought was an unbreakable foundation for my family, one made of sacrifice, hard work, and unconditional love. But as I sat in my room after my son's final dismissal, I understood. The foundation I had built was for a house I was no longer welcome in. They had built their own life on top of it, and in their new structure, there was simply no room for the old bricklayer who had laid the first stone. They think they have me figured out. In their eyes, I'm just a simple old man, a relic from a time when men worked with their hands and didn't understand the complexities of the modern world. They see my worn-out clothes, my quiet demeanor, and they see weakness. They think that $5,000 was everything I had, the last pathetic scrap of my independence. I can almost hear their conversations when I'm not around, the sighs of pity from Michael, the sharp, calculating complaints from Linda about the cost of keeping me. They believe they have me trapped here, a prisoner of their charity, waiting for the inevitable end. They see a cracked and crumbling foundation, but they have no idea what is buried underneath, solid and untouched. For days, I let their judgment settle over me like a shroud. I ate the solitary meals they left for me in the kitchen. I endured the silence. But their dismissal, that cold, clinical erasure of my truth, did something I don't think they ever expected. It didn't break me. It woke me up. It burned away the fog of grief and loneliness that had clouded my mind for years. The promise I made to Eleanor wasn't to suffer this kind of humiliation. It was to take care of our boy, yes, but it was also to live with dignity. And in that moment, I realized that my dignity was not something they could take from me. It was something I had secured long ago, in secret, waiting for a day I hoped would never come. Late one night, when the house was finally still, and the sounds of their lives had faded into the hum of the refrigerator, I slid off my bed. My knees protested with a familiar ache, a sharp reminder of a lifetime spent kneeling on hard ground, laying brick after brick. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need it. My hands knew this room, every inch of it. Under the worn rug beside my bed, there's a single floorboard that has always been just a little bit loose. I worked my old, stiff fingers into the seam, the wood groaning softly, a sound only I could hear. It was the sound of a secret breathing, of a life they knew nothing about, preparing to see the light. The board lifted, revealing a dark, hollow space beneath. My hand reached into the cold darkness and found it, the small, heavy metal box. It was cool to the touch, solid and real. It felt like an anchor in a world that had become unmoored. I pulled it out and held it in my lap, the weight of it a comfort. To them, my room was just a place filled with old photographs and worthless trinkets. They would have assumed this box held love letters from Eleanor or my old service medals. They saw what they wanted to see, a sentimental old fool clinging to the past. They never once suspected that this simple gray box contained my future. Not the one they had planned for me, but the one I had built for myself, piece by painstaking piece, in total silence. It all started over 30 years ago, on a construction site downtown. The architect on that project was a man named Arthur Henderson. He wasn't like the other bosses who looked at you like you were just a pair of hands. He saw people. He'd sit with me and the crew during our lunch break, sharing his coffee, asking about our families. He respected the craft. He'd watch me work, the way I checked every brick for level, the precision of my mortar joints. He saw the pride I took in my work, the honesty I poured into every wall. He saw a man who knew how to build things that last, and he believed that principle should apply to a man's life, not just his job. One afternoon, as we were packing up, Henderson pulled me aside. "Walter," he said, his voice quiet but serious amidst the noise of the site, "I see how you work. You're a careful man. Are you as careful with your money as you are with your bricks?" I told him I saved what I could, that I had a small bank account for Michael's college. He shook his head. "A bank is where money goes to sleep," he said. "You're a builder. You need to make your money build something for you. Don't let it just sit there. The city is changing. The places people ignore today will be the places they fight over tomorrow. You need to own a piece of it, no matter how small." His idea was simple, almost laughably so at the time. He didn't tell me to buy stocks or complicated bonds I wouldn't understand. He told me to buy things people would always need, a place to park their car and a place to store their stuff. He pointed out small, overlooked neighborhoods and said, buy a parking space there. Buy a storage unit. They're cheap now. People will think you're crazy. But in 20 years, Walter, that little concrete slab will be worth more than a car. It was the most practical, down-to-earth advice I'd ever received. It was advice a bricklayer could understand. It was about solid, tangible things. That night, I went home and told Eleanor. I laid out the whole idea on our small kitchen table. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She trusted my judgment, but more than that, she trusted my character. She knew I wasn't a gambler. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and put her hand on mine. This is for us, Walter, she said. Not for anyone else. This will be our secret, our safety net. So we can grow old with dignity and never, ever have to be a burden on anyone. That word, dignity. It was the cornerstone of our pact. It was the foundation of the secret life we started building that very day. And so we began. Every bonus I received, every bit of overtime pay, went into our secret fund. We bought our first parking spot in a dreary, forgotten part of the city for a price that seems impossible now. A few years later, we bought another, then a small storage unit in an industrial park. Over the decades, we quietly acquired 4 parking spaces and 3 storage units. Little dots on a city map that no one would ever connect to the quiet bricklayer and his wife. Michael and Linda thought I was a poor old man, fighting over the $5,000 my grandson stole. The irony is so thick I could choke on it. That stolen money is a pittance. The deeds in this box are worth around $300,000 today. I never told Michael. In the beginning, it was because Eleanor and I wanted him to build his own life, to find his own strength, without the safety net of an inheritance he knew was coming. We wanted him to learn the value of his own hard work. But after he married Linda, my reasons changed. I saw the way she looked at things, the way she measured value only in dollars and cents. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my bones, that if they knew about the properties, they wouldn't see them as a legacy of hard work and foresight. They would see them as a solution to their next financial problem, a fund for a kitchen remodel or a luxury vacation. They would have bled it dry without a second thought. They saw a simple man, an old bricklayer who knew about mortar and rebar, but nothing about the real world of money and investments. They saw my calloused hands and assumed they were connected to a simple mind. They dismissed my life stories as the rambling of an old man, never once imagining that those stories were a cover for a lifetime of quiet observation and careful planning. They underestimated me at every turn. That was their biggest mistake. They thought I was a crumbling wall, but I was a vault, and they never even bothered to look for the key. My silence, which they interpreted as weakness and confusion, was actually the most powerful tool I had. I lifted the lid of the box. The hinges made a faint, satisfying squeak. Inside, everything was in perfect order. The property deeds were in a thick plastic sleeve, the official seals still crisp. Beneath them was the small, worn velvet pouch where Eleanor kept the few gold coins her grandmother had given her. They weren't worth a fortune, but they were a connection to her, a solid piece of her history. And tucked in the corner was a single, slightly yellowed business card from my lawyer, Frank Peterson. Frank is an old-school guy, the son of a plumber from my old neighborhood. His word is his bond. He's the only other person in the world who knows about this. I held the box in my hands and thought about my promise to Eleanor. Take care of our boy. For years, I interpreted that as a command to provide for him, to support him, to give him everything I never had. But sitting there in the dark, the cold metal in my hands, I understood her words differently. Taking care of him didn't mean enabling his weakness. It didn't mean rewarding the cruelty he allowed his wife to inflict on me. It didn't mean handing over my life's secret work to a grandson who would steal from his own family. No. Taking care of our boy also meant letting him face the consequences of the man he had chosen to become. The sorrow I felt in that moment wasn't for my lost money or my wounded pride. It was a deeper, more profound grief for the son I had raised and the man he had failed to be. I remembered a boy who used to follow me around construction sites, his eyes wide with admiration. A boy who was proud that his father built things. Where did that boy go? He was lost somewhere in the pursuit of a life that valued appearances over substance, comfort over character. Giving him this fortune now would not fix him. It would only validate his choices. It would be the final act of a foolish old man, confirming his belief that my only purpose was to provide for him. A sense of calm settled over me, as clear and cold as the winter air outside. I was no longer a victim. I was the one in control. They thought they held all the cards. They had the house, the youth, the future. They thought they had stripped me down to nothing, leaving me with only my confused memories. But their entire world, their comfortable life, was built on a foundation I had laid, and they were utterly oblivious to the true wealth that lay beneath their feet. They were fighting over the loose change on the nightstand, while I held the title to the whole house. The power had been in my hands all along. I just hadn't been ready to use it. With a final, decisive click, I closed the lid of the box and pushed it back into its dark hiding place. I carefully replaced the floorboard, smoothing the rug back over it, until there was no sign that anything had been disturbed. The plan was already forming in my mind. It wouldn't be a dramatic confrontation. There would be no shouting, no accusations, no tearful recriminations. Revenge is a hot, messy thing. I was a bricklayer. I believed in clean lines, solid structures, and quiet strength. My justice would be the same. It would be silent. It would be strategic. And it would be absolute. The game was over. I was finally ready to make my last move. The next morning I woke up before the sun, the gray Chicago light just beginning to filter through my window. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of loneliness was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose as solid and clear as a line of freshly laid bricks. My decision was made. There was no anger left, just a quiet, unshakable resolve. I took out a piece of plain paper and my old fountain pen, the one Eleanor gave me for our 25th anniversary. My hand, usually stiff with age, was steady as I began to write. The letter wasn't for Michael or Ryan. It was for Chloe, the young college student from down the hall. She was the one who, for 2 years, had brought me my groceries every week, refusing any payment and instead just sitting with me for a few minutes to talk. Her kindness a small, warm light in the gathering darkness of my life. I kept the letter short and to the point, just like a work order. "Dear Chloe," I wrote, "I am an old man and my time is short. I have no family to leave my legacy to, so I am leaving it to you. You showed an old stranger kindness without asking for anything in return, and that is the most valuable thing in this world." I then gave her the simple instructions, the location of the key to the metal box, hidden in the spine of an old book on my shelf, and the 3-number combination, Eleanor's birthday. I told her to contact the lawyer, Frank Peterson, whose card was inside. I explained that the contents of the box would be enough to pay for her education and secure her future. I ended the letter with a simple request. Do good things with it. Build a life of character and kindness. That is all the thanks I need. I signed it simply, Walter. Later that morning, I made my first and only phone call. I called Frank, my lawyer, and told him I was enacting our final plan. I instructed him to liquidate everything as soon as Chloe made contact and to follow the instructions in my will, which we had updated years ago for just this possibility. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'll take care of it, Walter. You find your peace." After the call, I waited for Chloe to return from her morning classes. When I heard her footsteps in the hall, I met her at my door. I handed her the sealed envelope. "Chloe," I said, my voice even, "this is for you. But please, do me a favor. Don't open it until tomorrow morning." She looked at me, a question in her kind eyes, but she just nodded and said, "Of course, Walter. Are you okay?" I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in a long time. "I am now," I told her. Then I packed a single, small bag, a change of clothes, my razor, and the one picture of Eleanor I kept on my nightstand. I left the medals, the old books, everything else. They were just things, ghosts of a life that was over. I walked out of my room and through the living room. Michael was on the couch, glued to his phone as always, and Linda was in the kitchen, clattering dishes. Neither of them looked up. They didn't even register my presence as I walked past them with my bag. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave them a note. I simply opened the front door, stepped out into the cool air, and closed it quietly behind me. I didn't look back. I was leaving a house built on my sacrifices, but I was walking toward a home built on my own terms. My justice wasn't in their punishment, but in my freedom. Now, I sit here in a small, clean room at a modest place across town. It's not much, but it's mine, and it's peaceful. Through the window, I can see a small park where children play. I have enough from my Social Security to live here comfortably until the end. I sometimes wonder about the moment Michael and Linda finally realized I was gone for good, or the look on Ryan's face when he understood that the $5,000 he stole was the last penny he would ever see from me. But the thought brings me no pleasure, only a distant sadness. My real satisfaction comes from picturing Chloe opening that letter. I built hundreds of homes in my life, homes of brick and mortar. But my final act was to build a future for someone who deserved one. I honored my promise to Eleanor. I took care of our boy by finally taking care of myself. My life's work wasn't just in the walls that stand all over this city, but in the quiet dignity I refused to let them take from me.